Okay, it's Dr. Gold back for the second video as part of the time value of money series of videos that I'm doing. And again, these are very simple, basic elementary level videos to just sort of break down some of the concepts in the textbook. In the first video, we went over the notion of a timeline. We are touched on the future value and present value formulas. We talked about the difference between compounding and discounting, how a timeline works, the importance of time travel in finance, and the importance of writing down these 5 criteria when solving for problems. So let's get to a couple of problems in the textbook and begin to apply what we've learned so far. The first question comes from page 134 of our textbook, and it reads, you are put in charge of managing your firm's working capital. Your firm has $100,000 in extra cash and decides to put it into a savings account paying 7% interest compounded annually. How much will you have in your account in 10 years? Okay, so the first thing we need to do is write down the 5 criteria, and the first one is present value. Now, you'll notice there's a minus sign next to the $100,000, and that's because in the world of finance, when you're figuring out future and present value and applying the concept of time value of money to forecasting things, you have to view money coming in and coming out of your world as cash flows. That's the term that's used. Cash coming in, cash flow out, cash flow in. In this particular case, the company has $100,000 in its possession, but it's putting it into another institution, a bank. So that's a cash flow out. It's an investment that they're making into something else, in this case, a savings account that's going to pay 7%. It might be, sometimes companies have $100,000 and they go build a factory or buy a piece of equipment. Those are all cash flows out. Any type of present value amount will be viewed that way as a cash flow out. Future value will be a cash flow in. It's the money you get back at the end of in this case, 10 years, compounded at 7%. For the future value, we put a question mark because we don't know what the answer to that is. That's what we're solving for. There are no payments. Again, a payment is a regular or ongoing addition to either an investment that you make or some sort of process that you're involved in or activity. So for example, you might have an investment plan, and as we said, you have $100 to start out with, and you agree to invest a certain amount each year for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. Those additional payments are where payments come from. But these problems that we're going through right here aren't going to have payments being factored in. So for now, don't worry about that part, but you will need to know that for the exam. Interest rate, 7%. We know that from the question, and the number of periods is 10 years. And here's the timeline. So we're at point 0 here. We know that the present value is $100,000. So that's going to be where we're starting at. And then you have 10 periods moving forward all the way up to 10 years. And within each of these periods, you're earning 7% interest compounded on the previous year's dollar amount. So that sort of gives us a visual representation of the problem. Here's the math on the top here behind the solving a future value question. I'm not expecting you to do this math on the exam, but it's important to me as an instructor that you not just know how to use the functions on a calculator, but that you conceptually understand where these numbers come from. To just be able to solve for future value or present value or whatever the case might be, and not really understand, how we get to those numbers, I think is a disservice to you as a student. So let's just quickly go through the math for the future value calculation. It says here that the future value, which is unknown in this question, is the present value times 1 plus the annual rate of interest to the number of periods. It takes you through in the textbook that equation here, and it gives you the factor of 1.96715 right here, which you then would multiply by 100,000 to get to $196,715. That would be the answer. But how do we get the 1.9675 in case you don't know how to solve for that equation, which most of you, I'm sure, do. But for those of you who don't, I'll just show you how to use a basic calculator here that I have on my computer. So you type in a 1 plus 7%, which is 1.07, to the 10th power. So it's yx on the calculator to the 10th power, because it's the number of periods. And that equals 1.96715, the same thing we got in the problem that we're working on right here. So when you're doing these problems, again, you're not going to be busting out your calculator and being like, oh, okay, let me do the calculation for the factor, and so on and so forth. You're going to just jump to your financial calculator here and use the tools there. But I want you to at least understand where this number comes from, how we get to that number by using the different keys on the calculator, and we get to that number by using math. So on the calculator itself, for the N key, you would put 10, because there's 10 periods in this particular case, or years, as the problem specifies. Interest rate, 7, because the problem told us it's 7%. The present value, we're told, is $100,000. So again, you put a minus $100,000. That's an important thing to remember, simply because if you don't put a minus $100,000, when you go to calculate the future value, it's going to be a negative number, which isn't a big deal, but on a test, I might have, as one of the test question options, the answers, A, 196,715, B, minus 196,715, C, whatever that is, and D, whatever that is. Now, if you don't put a minus sign next to the present value of $100,000, you're going to get a negative future value of 196,715, and you might select choice B, and that would be the wrong choice. So make sure when you're typing in present value numbers, you remember to put a minus sign next to the dollar amount itself. All right, the second question here is dealing with non-annual periods. Okay, the first question dealt with 10 years. You get an interest payment of 7% each year at the end of the year for 10 years. Here, let's read the question on page 136. You've been put in charge of managing your firm's cash position, and notice that the Plaza National Bank is offering a special deal here where it's paying you interest compounded semi-annually instead of annually. So that's every 6 months or twice a year. So if you deposit $1,000 into the bank at 12%, what will your account be worth in 5 years? So again, it's a future value question, but the periods starts to get a little bit trickier. So let's again work through the 5 criteria. Present value is minus 1,000 because we're depositing $1,000 into the bank. The future value we don't know. We're trying to solve for that. There's no payment. Now the interest rate is 12%, but it's divided by 2 because we're going to receive 2 interest payments per year. So 12% divided by 2 is 6%, and we're going to get 6% every 6 months in this particular example. The number of periods, although it says 5 years up on the question, up on top here, it's actually 10 periods because it's 5 years, but we're getting interest payments twice a year. So there's 2 periods per year times 5 years is 10 total periods, or 10 total 6-month periods. And you can see here the timeline. There's 10 periods listed, and in each one of these periods, which are 6-month intervals, so from 0 to 1 is 6 months, from 1 to 2 is another 6 months, so you've just finished 1 year, and then here you finish 2 years, and then here you finish 3 years, and then here you finished 4 years, and then finally at period number 10, you finish the 5-year period, but you're earning 6% in each of these periods, okay? So how do you solve this on the calculator? Well, and I have the math up here again for you in case you want to work through that manually, you can. You simply would take the interest rate, the annual interest rate, and divide it by 2, which is going to be 6. So it would be 1.06 to the 10th power, and you'll get that factor and multiply that by 1,000. But here you get, on the calculator, periods 10, because we just figured that out. Interest rate's going to be 6, which is half of the stated interest rate in the question itself, because you're getting those twice a year. The present value will be $1,000, and when you solve for the future value, you get your answer of $1,790.85. The next question deals for solving for present value, and I'll pick up those two questions, the present value ones, in the next video. So just to summarize, so far in these videos we've gone through the notion of a timeline. We've covered the concept of compounding and discounting and which one each is associated with. We understand that a period is a representation of time, but not necessarily 1 year. It could be 6 months, as was the example in the question we just went over. It could be 1 month, and so on and so forth. We also went over what the math formulas are behind the present value and future value calculations. So, for example, if you want to know what the present value amount is of a certain dollar amount in 5 years from now, you would use this formula or your finance calculator. We also covered the importance of writing down the 5 criteria for these types of problems and trying to kind of map out what it is we're solving for to help us to focus in on the right thing. You'll see later on in the semester that sometimes problems or questions you're asked to solve require multiple steps. So first you might have to figure out the future value of something, and then you might have to figure out something after that. But for now, just focus on these 5 things, drill them into your head, understand what PV represents, what FV represents, what payments represent, interest rates and periods. And that will really give you a jump start on being able to read questions, understand how to sort of piece together the solution that you're looking for, and we'll pick up, as I said, with some present value questions in the next video.